What is up, guys? Jimmy checking in, and I would really appreciate it if you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and rang that bell for all alerts. Make sure you shout out your location down below, or just type, "I am doing my part to help the algorithm." Everything started with a noise at 4:35 in the morning on June 18th, 2021. Emergency services in Tama County, Iowa, received a frantic 911 dial from a woman named Karina Cooper, who sounded absolutely out of her mind. She screamed that someone had gunned down her spouse, Ryan Cooper, leaving him drenched in gore. While the operator listened to sheer terror on the line, the officers arriving 7 minutes later encountered a totally different vibe. Pulling up to the farmhouse in Trier at 4:42 that morning, the lead officer stepped into a nightmare that was equal parts heartbreaking and weird. Ryan Cooper, a well-known agriculturalist in the area, was sitting dead in his easy chair. Medical examiners eventually proved he took 2 bullets to the face while his 3 children were home, yet Karina herself was the creepiest part of the puzzle. She was not kneeling next to her partner, holding the receiver, or attempting to save his life. Authorities discovered her perched right on top of the corpse, making the situation look super shady, especially since the gun was gone despite a lone casing on the floor. With zero evidence of a break-in, the officer escorted the mother and kids outside while his gut told him something was very wrong. The massive gap between her hysterical voice recording and the clearly arranged physical clues set the tone for this baffling investigation right from the jump. This was the primary hint that detectives were not looking at the results of a burglary gone bad. It looked more like the opening act of a scripted show. But even with all those red flags, the investigation hit a wall of silence. Ryan Cooper's murder went without an arrest for over 2.5 years, leading the community to think the trail had gone cold. His relatives suffered through a torture-filled delay for answers, but that time lag was not because the cops were lazy. Instead, the authorities were dealing with a complicated cyber investigation, constructing their argument using electronic records rather than DNA or prints. Moving slowly and carefully had a huge monetary impact, ironically giving Karina the cash she needed to hire a high-powered legal team. By December of 2021, as experts dug through computer files, the widow managed to push through a request for money. She cashed out her late partner's policy, pocketing more than $500,000. Those electronic clues finally came together to reveal a clear roadmap. Detectives found the oldest reason in the book, a hidden romance, involving Mrs. Cooper and a junior guy named Houston Danker. They messed up by trusting that the internet forgets, using Snapchat under the assumption that their plots and daydreams would vanish into thin air. Police retrieved every word, exposing conversations where they dreamed up a wedding, talked about tomorrow, and schemed about having babies. State attorneys claimed those texts proved the duo was cooking up this murder plot as far back as March of 2021. Browser logs from Danker were terrifying, showing he looked up how to secretly get rid of a person. Tech data also established exactly when the killing happened, highlighting texts sent the evening before and the morning of June 18th. Just seconds prior to dialing the police, Karina sent a text to Danker that buried her, which I will read word for word. "Don't forget about those shells." Because once the cyber evidence was solid, police cuffed Karina Cooper on February 19th, 2024. Houston Danker got slapped with charges 60 days after that, meaning the hammer of the law was ready to crush them both. These partners in crime decided to handle their court battles in totally opposite ways. Staring down a trial on August 12th, 2025, Houston Danker caved right before they picked the jury. He copped to the first-degree charge and told the magistrate exactly what the state had been arguing for years as part of his deal. He confirmed they were sleeping together and had spent months organizing the hit, a statement that absolutely destroyed Karina Cooper's strategy. Her whole argument hinged on the idea that Danker was a lone wolf, since her lawyers could not dispute the relationship or the obvious Snapchats, forcing them to spin the story. During a super brief intro, her attorney said Houston Danker's name a dozen times -1, portraying him as a controller and Karina as his prey. Her team claimed she was never an accomplice, but rather a self-described moron lost in a daydream. However, since Danker had already spilled the beans under oath, that whole imagination defense was doomed to fail from the start. Karina Cooper decided to testify, taking a massive risk to convince the panel personally that she was just living in her head. She swore to the court that her fling with Danker was nothing more than internet role play. She blamed her ex-boyfriend completely, stating he mentioned killing Ryan frequently and was definitely the guy who shot the gun. Yet she faced the toughest query of all. If she knew he was a killer, why deceive the authorities for 30 months? To which she replied she was scared. She alleged that following the murder, Danker vowed to hurt her kids, making her too petrified to come clean. State attorneys grilled her without mercy, leaving me wondering why her lawyers ever let such a shaky person talk to the judge. Unless you are Mother Teresa, a skilled attorney can twist your words until you look like a total villain. The prosecution tore her narrative apart, exposing every hole while she bounced between rage and sorrow on the stand. One minute she was snapping back at the attorneys, and the next she was sobbing as they made her read those damning social media texts to the room. That display likely sealed her fate, reminding the jurors of the overly dramatic emergency call she made right after the crime. It was impossible to square her scared victim act with the cold, hard data proving she was actually the mastermind behind the whole plot. Just like that frantic phone call to police, her waterworks in court did not fool a single person or cast any doubt on her guilt. Following a week of intense testimony, the jury needed only 3 hours to come back with the obvious verdict: guilty on all counts. Iowa law leaves no wiggle room for this charge. So on September 19, 2025, the judge handed down the required punishment. Karina Cooper was ordered to spend the rest of her natural life behind bars, with zero chance of ever walking free again. Her partner in crime, Danker, got hit with the exact same penalty, meaning the former lovers are now rotting in separate cells across the state. While the criminal chapter was officially closed, there was still one loose end that needed tying up regarding the finances. The massive life insurance payout, which was the main reason she did it, was technically still sitting in Karina's control. Ryan's brothers and sisters, acting on behalf of his estate, launched a civil suit to strip those ill-gotten gains away from her. That legal battle is currently grinding through the civil system, though everyone expects the family will eventually win that cash back. The sad reality is that nobody knows how much cash is actually left for the kids, who effectively lost both mom and dad to this mess. It is ironic that the specific app they thought would hide their dirty laundry ended up being the exact thing that destroyed them. This entire saga really serves as a perfect example of how crime and punishment work in the digital era. You might be able to hide the truth for a little while, but in this information age, nothing ever truly gets deleted. Those two geniuses genuinely thought that just because the messages vanished from their phone screens, the data was not stored on a server somewhere. Back in July of 1986, 38-year-old Eveline Aguilar was chilling on her patio with a novel, having no clue her time was running out. She spent part of the evening catching up with her buddies over the landline. The conversation covered selling old furniture, followed by a quiet dinner, a film, and a late dip in the apartment pool. That late-night swim turned out to be the absolute last time another human being saw her breathing. Within 24 hours, she was discovered murdered in her own bed, leaving detectives stumped by the brutality of the crime for years. On July 14, 1986, a worried neighbor saw her front door ajar and walked in to find a nightmare waiting inside. Eveline was lying lifeless in her room at the San Jose complex just outside Winter Park, Florida, showing signs of a massive struggle. Her upper body and hands were covered in defensive wounds, and the coroner quickly confirmed what the police already knew. Someone had taken Eveline's life in a chaotic, cold-blooded assault that showed zero mercy. Police noticed a glass pane missing from the window, which was clearly how he got in, and they managed to lift some palm prints from the ledge. They also found some biological evidence from a male suspect, but back in 1986, that kind of stuff was basically useless. For more than 30 years, her relatives and the local sheriff's department kept the faith that one day they would nab the guy responsible. As the decades rolled by and crime lab technology made huge leaps forward, they ran fresh tests without any luck. But everything changed when 2018 rolled around. 32 years post-mortem, the cold case squad decided to crack open the Aguilar file one more time to see what they missed. Investigators uploaded the preserved genetic samples into the national database, known as CODIS, praying the algorithms would finally give them a hit. Taking that shot in the dark ended up delivering a massive breakthrough that shocked everyone involved. The genetic markers from the bedroom matched perfectly with a guy by the name of Danny Emmett. Danny was 50 years old by 2019, having no idea he had left his calling card behind all those years ago. It turned out that back in 2005, he had willingly handed over a sample to the cops during a completely different investigation. He walked away from that incident without charges, but his genetic profile stayed permanently logged in the Florida state system. More than 10 years later, that archived swab ended up being the smoking gun that tied him directly to Aguilar's murder. With the DNA hit in hand, the detectives went back to the physical evidence to see if anything else lined up. Just as they suspected, Emmett's palm print was a perfect match for the ones found on the window ledge, nailing the coffin shut on his defense. It took 33 long years of guessing, but the authorities finally had a solid ID on the monster who did this. A case that had been dead in the water for decades was suddenly moving full steam ahead toward justice. Back when the crime went down, Danny Emmett was just a 17-year-old kid living a stone's throw from Eveline's place, completely off the cops' radar. Investigators in 1986 never imagined the killer could be a neighbor, mostly because he was so young and seemed to have no ties to her. Looking back now, it is obvious the guy knew the neighborhood like the back of his hand. He eventually confessed to hanging around Aguilar's building to score pot, which is when he spotted her living up on the second level. He made a choice to break in and rob her one evening, but that burglary quickly spiraled into a nightmare scenario. Keep in mind, that is just the story he is sticking to, and nobody has ever been able to confirm if it is actually true. Considering the brutal things he did, I would suggest not believing a single word that comes out of his mouth. For years following the murder, Danny kept finding himself on the wrong side of the law. He racked up over 30 arrests during a lifetime of trouble, yet somehow never got connected to the Aguilar investigation. Fast forward to 2019, and he had settled in Knoxville, Tennessee, quietly washing dishes at a local restaurant. He probably thought his dark secret from 1986 was ancient history, but he could not have been more mistaken. On May 22, 2019, justice finally came knocking for the killer more than 30 years after Eveline passed away. After a DNA match secured a warrant, Seminole County deputies teamed up with Knoxville officers to track down and cuff the 50-year-old suspect. This massive break in the case brought a wave of comfort to everyone involved, especially the folks who had spent decades praying for some kind of closure. Eveline's three sisters stood by as the sheriff shared the news, marking a tearful end to a very long wait. Authorities immediately slapped Danny with charges for first-degree premeditated murder and breaking and entering. Almost 37 years post-crime, the trial for Eveline Aguilar's murder finally kicked off in 2023. Now a man in his 50s, Emmett entered a not guilty plea, insisting he never knew Aguilar or set foot in her home. However, the scientific proof painted a completely different picture and blew his lies right out of the water. The prosecution laid out DNA and fingerprint matches that proved beyond a doubt he was the one who broke in. One of the biggest bombshells came when Jeff Murphy, an old cellmate, took the stand to say Danny had spilled his guts. Murphy detailed how Danny had calmly narrated the events multiple times, framing it as a simple heist that went south. The thing that creeped Murphy out the most was how relaxed the guy acted while telling the story, talking about a brutal slaying like it was just another boring day at the office. That cold-blooded jailhouse admission, paired with hard forensic data, built an airtight case against him, despite the passage of time. In May 2023, the jury convicted Danny Emmett for the murder of Eveline Aguilar, finally bringing peace to a family haunted since 1986. A month later, the judge handed down a sentence that ensures this monster stays behind bars, giving him life imprisonment plus an extra concurrent term for the burglary count. According to the ruling, he has to sit in a cell for at least 25 years before he can even ask for parole. Hey guys, this is Jimmy asking you to please smash that subscribe button, ring the bell, and enable all alerts so you never miss a video. Do not forget to take a look at our membership perks as well by hitting the join button or following the Patreon link down in the description box. Back in February 2020, a 4-year-old girl named Megan Kung passed away in Singapore, yet not a single soul reported it or came looking for her. Her tiny body sat hidden inside a cement-sealed box in a condo for 3 excruciating months. Eventually, they moved the box to a workshop, incinerated the remains in a metal drum using charcoal, and dumped the ashes into the ocean. The truth only surfaced 5 months later, not due to police work, but because 2 frantic missing person reports were filed on the exact same day. The first report came from her grandmother on her mom's side, who had been worried sick for a while. The second came from Simon Kung, her biological dad, who had just gotten out of jail and was searching everywhere for his little girl. The investigation that followed uncovered a tale of pure evil that is hard to even comprehend, highlighting a massive failure in the system that let a child simply vanish from the face of the earth. This was not a one-time accident, but the tragic result of 13 months of torture by her birth mother, Fu Li Ping, and her boyfriend, Brian Wong. They frequently beat Megan with a cane, causing injuries severe enough that her preschool teachers spotted the marks in March 2019. When the staff questioned Fu, she owned up to the physical abuse, claiming she was just disciplining the child. So the school warned her that they would report her to the Ministry of Social and Family Development if she did not stop immediately. On September 17, 2019, she pulled Megan out of preschool, using the excuse that the program wasn't helping her learn Chinese. That one move took Megan off the radar completely, cutting her off from the only responsible adults who were actually asking about her bruises. From that point on, the little girl was staying around the clock with Wong and Fu. Things just went downhill fast for her after that transition. Honestly, what those monsters did to her is too sick to even describe, so I am going to skip the graphic specifics here. I don't usually give warnings like this, but seriously, save your sanity and do not go searching for the details online. It is the stuff of nightmares, and considering that is only what they confessed to, the real horror was probably even worse. On February 21st, 2020, after enduring over a year of torture, Brian Wong ended it all by punching Megan hard in the gut. The impact was severe enough to burst her insides. Without a body to examine, experts later concluded she likely died from blood poisoning triggered by the internal damage and swelling. Keep in mind, though, that this is technically just a theory given what happened next. We are basically relying on what those savages told authorities. The events following that final assault are arguably the most disturbing part of this entire nightmare. While Megan was curled up on the floor in agony, clutching her belly, Fu, Wong, and their buddy Nouvelle Chua just totally ignored her cries. They actually chose to go use substances instead of helping her. When they noticed she wasn't moving hours later, they attempted CPR, but she was already gone. So they immediately switched modes to saving their own skins. Calling the authorities was out of the question since they didn't want their abuse exposed. They wrapped her remains in a blanket, plastic wrap, and packing tape before stuffing her into a carton, sealing it with concrete, and stashing it in their home. They sat on that dark secret for 3 months until May 8, 2020, when they hauled the box to a car repair shop. They burned the evidence inside a metal drum, using 2 cartons of charcoal to fuel the fire. To top off the disrespect, they dumped her ashes into the ocean at East Coast Park, leaving the world clueless about her death for 5 whole months. Their plan worked for a while, but the truth finally came out on July 20th, 2020, thanks to 2 coincidental police reports rather than forensic evidence. One came from Megan's grandmother on her mom's side, who had been anxious for months and had already flagged her missing back in January. The other report was filed by Simon, Megan's biological dad. He was fresh out of jail and getting vague answers whenever he asked where his little girl was. Worried sick and unable to track her down, he went straight to the cops to file a missing persons report. That dual filing kick-started a major investigation, and detectives realized pretty fast that the child was already deceased. It only took about 4 days for the gruesome reality to come to light. Authorities handcuffed Fu Li Ping and Brian Wong on July 24, 2020, grabbed Nouvelle Chua shortly after, and slapped the main pair with official charges the next day. Those charges were serious enough to potentially send them to the gallows under Singaporean law. The legal process dragged on for years, while all the defendants underwent endless mental health assessments. Things finally shifted in February 2025 when the pair agreed to plead guilty to lesser counts. The judge handed down the verdicts on April 3rd, 2025, which included mandatory strokes of the cane. Brian Wong got slapped with a 30-year prison term and 17 lashes. Even though that punishment isn't meant to kill, the whipping is so brutal that some convicts actually die from the trauma. Fu Ping received 19 years behind bars and stated she wouldn't be fighting the decision. Looking at the time they served, you can't help but feel they got a surprisingly sweet deal. This is a nation that still executes people regularly for moving relatively small amounts of narcotics. Folks there get the death penalty for quantities that would just get you a slap on the wrist in other countries. But in this situation, where a helpless child was tortured and killed, neither Wong nor Fu will ever have to face the hangman. 30 years and 17 lashes might seem harsh for Wong, but he will probably walk free while he still has plenty of life left. It is even harder to wrap your head around Fu only getting 19 years. The injustice is glaring when you stack this against the extreme sentences handed out for victimless crimes in that region. To me, a justice system that executes people for marijuana but spares child killers has its moral compass totally broken. Anyway, this case just makes my blood boil. But I hope Megan is resting in peace because she deserved way better than this.